So the fact that the new Star Wars show, The Mandalorian, is actually doing pretty well right now, and the new game is actually doing very well right now. I'm playing that right now. Well, not right now, but I'm playing that. I'm getting through it, and it's actually pretty good. I'm enjoying it. So let's talk about the movies, like the Star Wars movies, the prequels, the original trilogy, the new trilogy, and the spin-offs, like Rogue One. I'm not talking about Solo: Star Wars Story, because I don't have that movie, and I've seen it once, which was about half a year ago, and I don't give a fuck to watch it again. Oy. So my synopsis of that movie is that it's shit, and I don't want to watch it again. Cool. Okay, so Star Wars Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, is the fourth movie in the entire saga, but technically the first one, chronologically speaking. It'll take you a while to work that out, but you'll get there eventually. So this movie is basically primarily revolved around Liam Neeson's character and Ewan McGregor's character, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Qui-Gon Jinn. Ewan McGregor's character is Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Liam Neeson is Qui-Gon Jinn, if you don't know. Okay? So the basic plot of this movie is that Darth Sidious is trying to get Queen Amidala to sign some treaty or whatnot so that they can do illegal shit legally on Naboo. It's very strange. Very, very strange. Okay, I do want to say this. I appreciate the prequels a lot more than I used to. I used to watch these movies and be like, these are the fucking worst movies I have seen in my life. But nowadays, I'll watch after having read the book that was released by the Disney CEO, the current Disney CEO, about him and George Lucas, and about how George Lucas felt betrayed that the new trilogy isn't following any of the crap that he had laid out himself. The new trilogy wanted to focus more primarily on the midichlorians and shit like that. And that's actually something I was intrigued about, but right now, the new trilogy actually feels like it's being put together by a blind guy in a fucking doorknob factory, I swear to God. But that aside, I appreciate the prequels more than I used to, because they at least have a plot driving the whole thing forward. This plot, the plot in the original trilogy was so solid and so structured, so filled with layers that it felt like a nice story that was actually one after the other, but it was still having the same thing drive the whole thing forward so that they could feel necessary. They felt like they were an actual story. The new Star Wars trilogy doesn't feel like an actual story. I'll get to those when I actually get to those later down the track. The prequels also feel like they're an actual story being driven forward. Whether or not you like the story, or whether or not the story actually lines up with what you like, is up to you. But for me, I enjoy that George Lucas was actually trying to make something that we would actually enjoy. Whether or not that succeeded, again, up to you. So, some of the biggest problems that I have with this movie, one big problem in particular, is that this movie is kind of pointless. It's kind of unnecessary. The only thing that's actually necessary for the whole thing being driven forward is the fact that they find Anakin Skywalker on Tatooine, and they save him, they recruit him or whatever, and they take him away and they take him to Coruscant. The only problem with that is that didn't need to happen in a big movie full of really unnecessary crap. We don't need any of this crap. We don't need any of the crap that's actually in this movie. Like all of the stuff that's in this movie could have been explained in a pretty brief and pretty fucking vague moment in the next movie, which could have been the first movie. Just have Attack of the Clones be the first one, and have that one be where Obi-Wan is just like, oh yeah, when I found you on the planet or some shit, and then we recruited you, and then off we go. Then off we go on our adventure. Let's go save Amidala and keep her alive or some shit. But this movie just wanted to be so big for itself. It had a big legacy that it had to somehow bear. It had to bear its own legacy. It had to bear the legacy of the original trilogy and all the fans that came with that movie, those movies. So this movie so I feel George Lucas just had that on his mind. It was on his mind. It was like, fuck, the original trilogy. It was so great. I have to make it again. I have to make something that is just at least as good as that. The only problem is he tried to overfill it with so much crap and so much boring shit that just didn't work. The biggest problem with this movie, one of the biggest problems with this movie, is the fact that there's no level of tension at all in the movie. Think about that. Just think about that for a second, because every moment of tension that's actually in the movie, all the characters are just like feeling they're on a Sunday cruise, like the part where they're underwater and this big fish is just charging after them, and they're all just like, oh well, there's a big fish coming after us. Can we stop off at Macca's, please? And that's pretty much how it feels. Like the entire movie feels like that. There's no rising level of emotion. They're all at that baseline emotion for the majority of the movie. Even when Anakin Skywalker, probably the only thing of emotion that I can really remember from the movie is when Anakin was actually leaving his mother. He was leaving, and he was like, I can't leave, Mom, and I just don't want to leave. Whether or not you like Jake Lloyd as young Anakin Skywalker is completely up to you, but, I mean, I really don't feel like shitting on a child actor right now, so I'm not going to, but it was at least a different level of emotion than the rest of the movie. Everything else was just baseline emotion. It was just casual day at the office. Every other movie has at least a different level of emotion, but this movie was just baseline. It was just there, just right there. Like they never set the bar any higher or any lower. Maybe a bit lower. But they just kept it there. They kept it there. That was as emotional as they got. And that was annoying, because it made it feel very boring. It got very boring very quickly. If you watch this movie, you will probably be sitting there on your phone for like 15, 20 minutes, and then you look up and you're just like, oh yeah, there's a movie on. You forget to watch the movie because it's boring. There's nothing pulling you into it because there's no emotion actually pulling you into it. The fact that the story's boring also is another problem. And there's also the action sequences. The action for the most part, the action well, I wouldn't say the action sequences. I'm going to say the pod race. The pod race scene is actually pretty fucking boring too. I mean, the camera angle when watching the pod race scene is boring. Like it's always the one thing. It's always left to right, left to right, left to right. I don't even think there was a right to left. It was all that one shot, just zoom. Zoom. It never changed. It never was different. It was never different. And the biggest problem with that is the fact that that part in the movie was made to sell a game. That shit's real. That part in the entire movie was created to sell a game. And I've never played. I don't think I played the game. But I've heard it wasn't that good, or maybe it was good. I don't know, but it was simply made to sell a game, and the game wasn't even that good that I've heard in the first place. So why even do that? But that's the biggest part. That's the problem with this movie, is the fact that it wasn't made to sell a story. It's the fact that it was made to sell a game. It was made to make money. That's what this movie was. It was just a big fucking cash grab. And I get it. I do understand that George Lucas still wanted to make a story that he enjoyed, that he wanted us to enjoy. But the fact that he spent so much time actually trying to make a story that was really meant to make money over making a compelling story just makes it fall flat. The action sequences are pretty enjoyable. I do admit that. Like the end action sequences with Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Darth Maul, entertaining as hell. Problem is though, I didn't give a fuck. When Qui-Gon took it, spoilers for this movie, but it came out like 10, 20 years ago. I can't remember when it made. 20 years ago. It came out the year I was born. I'm 20. Okay. 20 years ago when this was made. So I'm gonna spoil it. Okay? You still here? Alright. So when Qui-Gon takes a fucking stab to the chest, I didn't give a fuck. He was dead, so what? Like, the characters are all baseline in this movie. They're given nothing for you to latch onto, so that if they die, you don't care. And the biggest issue I have with Qui-Gon's character is the fact that he is a problem. The fact that he is a character that was never once referenced to in the original trilogy, and the fact that in the hut in Empire Strikes Back, when Luke is on Dagobah and he's talking to Yoda, and then Obi-Wan is just like, "Was I any different when you taught me?" And it's like, well, no, apparently you didn't teach him apparently no, he didn't teach you, because you were taught by another guy that you've never mentioned before in your life, at least in this trilogy. And he's never mentioned it, not once. So where the fuck did Qui-Gon come from? Is he just a magical character that everybody was just like, yep, zap, nobody remembers you? Oh, right, we're in Harry Potter now, so obliviate. You don't remember. Oh, well, apparently that doesn't work anymore, so, well, you remember. Welcome back. I'll get to that in its own movie too. But yeah, the biggest problem with this movie is the fact that it has no point. It's pointless. The only thing that is actually pointful or necessary for the story is the fact that Anakin Skywalker is in it. It's the fact that they save him, they recruit him, or they free him as a slave, and they take him back to they take him back to Coruscant, which they could have still done. They could have done in Attack of the Clones. They could have had the biggest problem with that is the fact that in Attack of the Clones, it's all 10 years later. It's all 10 years later. So everybody else is in a different spot than when this one left off. So why even have this movie? But that's just my problem with this movie. My problems with this movie. I do like the cast. I like Samuel L. Jackson. I like Ewan McGregor. I like Liam Neeson. I like the cast. I like Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman is gorgeous. But yeah, other than that, this movie really falls flat and it doesn't achieve as well as it wanted to with what they were trying to do, which was give as much of an origin story to Anakin Skywalker as they could. They wanted to give him a compelling backstory, which in essence, on paper, it is a compelling backstory. The fact that his mother, the fact that he was a slave, and the fact that he lived on Tatooine, the fact that his family's on Tatooine, and they're all slaves, that gives some compellence to his character. But other than his character, everyone else doesn't really have anything to latch onto. So that if they die, you don't care, like Darth Maul or Liam Neeson. Qui-Gon. And there's also parts that really don't make sense. I mean, there's also the end scene where Yoda and Obi-Wan are sitting in that little area, and Yoda's like, "Agree with you, the Council does. Your apprentice, the boy, will be." And he walks off. And then you're left with that feeling. It's like, well, why did you come to that conclusion? I mean, literally 20 minutes ago, you had the mindset, like the entire council had the mindset, no, that kid is too old. Why did you change your mind? Like, it never explains. Not once. Other problem, I'm going to touch on this, is the fact that the end part of this movie is overcrowded with so much crap that it's like trying to fill a room with a weak floor. You're just trying to fucking jam so many people in that one room that the floor just crumbles beneath you and just everybody falls to the ground. The two scenes that should have been in this movie, is Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Darth Maul fighting. Yes, that should have been in the movie. Padme and her crew going after the Viceroy to try and take them down should have been in the movie. The Gungans fighting all those fucking droids should not be in the movie. Anakin accidentally blowing up a fucking ship by accident should not be in the movie. And I know you're probably waiting for it. You're probably waiting for me to be like, oh, what about Jar Jar? Jar Jar's a terrible character. That's just all I've got to say. Okay, I'm going to rate this movie with my own rating system that I've made up, that I've kind of got the words to. I kind of touched on it a little bit in my Terminator review, but I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to just give the review. Well, give the rating, and then one day, probably make a video explaining my rating system. Okay? We'll get there one day. So, this movie is worth watching with some of your attention.